Today I want to share with you an extraordinary and exciting understanding about how to simply and easily deal with the contamination in our world from glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Monsanto's Roundup and other widely used herbicides. As you may know, there was a recent court case in which a man was awarded a $289 million payout because it was ruled that he had contracted cancer from his contact with Roundup, a verdict Monsanto plans to appeal. Further, there is a huge backlog of similar such cases. Indeed, it has been recently revealed that there is contamination in a great deal of the food that comes to us, since glyphosate is very widely used and is now used by many grain growers prior to harvest to prevent the ripened grain from shooting if it rains. This means the exposure to glyphosate through the food chain has grown enormously. Glyphosate has been widely used for around 50 years. During his public teaching on Thursday, August 16, 2018, Mehran Kesh was asked if there was anything we could do to ameliorate the effects of glyphosate. It turns out that Kesh was unfamiliar with glyphosate and its usage, which makes what he had to say even more extraordinary. On seeing the glyphosate molecule, he immediately understood why it is so dangerous and how to neutralize it. In the following video, you will hear him analyze and explain how to deal with it using the plasma water of the GANS of CO2 and why this is effective. As you listen to this, it is important to recognize that Mehran Kesh looks at things from the perspective of the plasmatic field from which everything, including us, arises. We are conditioned to look at things from the matter state perspective, since this is our experience. For example, you will hear him speak of elements transforming from one to another. In our temporal perspective, we think a calcium atom is, was, and always will be a calcium atom. And yet, underlying this, we know that these elements were, at some point, created in some manner, yet we behave like they have always existed and always will. In his teachings, Kesh explains that the transformation of elements is quite common. Indeed, he has explained elsewhere that much of the calcium in our bodies actually comes from zinc. He explains that this transition occurs via isotopes of these elements which match, and when they match, it is quite easy and common for them to transform within our bodies which are in the GANS state. I have taken the time to explain this because I have left quite a bit of the discussion that Kesh provided as to how the neutralization of glyphosate is achieved and how these transformations occur in our bodies and their importance. The simplicity with which the impact of glyphosate can be dealt with, converting it from a threat to a benefit for our bodies, is simply breathtaking. Let me share this with you.
Okay, if you look at this, it gives you a very direct effect why it causes cancer. You see, the DNA of the body of the man has a skeleton of what they call the spinal back of it, which contains, you see what it contains, and then you understand why it's so dangerous. The reason it's dangerous, because it carries amino acid backbone, which is phosphorus.
It's got everything the same. It's got the hydrogen, the oxygen, the nitrogen.
But we have that. You see, the spiral shape of the DNA is because of the spacing of the phosphor. So in this structure, with having, you see why this is so lethal. Because it interacts in balance with the backbone of the DNA. The helix shape of DNA, I've written a paper somewhere, I've explained it somewhere, is due to phosphor. So you have the phosphor which already touches the helix, so the helix changes its position, it is not the same shape because of the interaction of the field. So in that position, everything moves. So that's why it's so dangerous. And there is a way you can change it. If it is in the waters, you can change it very simple. The spinal space of the amino acid is a protein carrier. So you have a protein in there. Nitrogen of the protein, the hydrogen of the protein, the oxygen is there. What is left is a carbon. And if you look at the shape of the structure, it's very easy. You see the interaction of the fields themselves create the carbon. So this is a copy of the amino acid by field interaction. That's why it's so lethal. It interacts because it mimics amino acid, it mimics DNA, so DNA takes as part of it, so it opens it up, the shape of the helix changes, and that's why it's so dangerous. As knowledge seekers, you should be able to read this very, very easy. Look what you have. You have 5 oxygens. You have 4 hydrogens. You have 1 nitrogen. So all you need is the conversion field forces of 1 oxygen or conversion field forces of 2 oxygen to create a field force of a carbon. Then you have a full amino acid, which is the backbone of the DNA, and then you have the spinal cord balance of the DNA helix condition, which gives you the phosphorus. That's it. Voila. You see it, why it's so dangerous. And there is a way you can change this in your systems. If you add CO2 GANS to this, will destroy it. All you need to do with this is to create a CO2, add a water, a GANS water of the CO2. Most probably CO2 itself as a GANS, 1 drop, will disbalance this, will break up the chain. Then you're left with the phosphor, and that phosphor you need, and it'll become a positive use in the structure of the body of the man, because the phosphor will change to the sulfur, becomes part of your immune system, and the phosphor becomes the backbone of the structure of the physical existence. You strengthen the amino acid chain. Just add 1 drop of CO2 into this combination, you disbalance it. Because one of these water oxygens loses, you have a H2O. You have a H2O. So now you have 2 drops of water. What are you left with? With 1 hydrogen and 2 oxygens. When you bring the 2 oxygen with the hydrogen, it has to split. Because if you go back in the world of understanding, in the world of creation, hydrogen and nitrogen gains or loses to become a carbon or oxygen to create the condition of life, amino acid. So when you introduce a CO2, you add to condition that the 4 oxygens become balanced. Then you bring the carbon, the hydrogen is released on its own, nitrogen is freed, and you bring in the total balance of the liquid amino acid. You have a P with it, now the structure is broken. It strengthens the amino acid, the structure of the DNA. Actually, if you understand this, you can use this as a benefit to human race than a danger to human race. If you can add a CO2 and check it and see what it comes to, then we need phosphor. We need huge amount of phosphor. Because the phosphor and sulfur are part of the, when you do the blood test, you see what it comes. They look at your sulfur. Sulfur is a detergent. And phosphor is a building block. If you look at your blood test, you look at the chlorine, the chlor, you look at the phosphor, you look at the sulfur. These are disinfectant of the higher order materials in the blood of the man and the physicality. So if you add a CO2 to this, you change this to the benefit of mankind. But you have to understand why, and it's there. Now it mimics the DNA, and that's why when it mimics, it puts pressure on, and then because it's missing a carbon in the amino acid chain, it moves the phosphor in a spinal cord of what are called the backbone helix structure of the DNA, and it creates havoc. It doesn't become cancer, you create a new element. But if you add a CO2 to it, and you see the effect. And it can be used as a huge benefit to humanity. If you can release the phosphor, which is one of the most needed elements in the body of the man. There is nothing more needed in the body than phosphor. When you eat food and you eat the wrong food, forever your body is converting the elements into phosphor to guarantee the existence and continuity of the DNA. every cell, every DNA cell needs that energy of the phosphor. And most of the work of the body of the man to keep the physicality of the man in his DNA is converting elements continuously to phosphor. Because every cell, every DNA, when you see a phosphor in the DNA, phosphor has a cycle of life. 1 year, 6 months, 2 months, it has to be replaced. Where does it come from? Unless the body converts it, most of the conversion comes in thyroid glands. And it comes in thymus. Because it uses a lot of energy of the B12 to convert, to keep phosphor always available for every single cell which is produced, carries the DNA, has the whole, what we call the spinal backcord helix, that those phosphor in that, the guy puts just a P, you read it, that phosphor has a lifetime, has to be changed. It loses its power. So it needs to be continuously replaced. So when you have this phosphor, the time when it comes to be replaced, this takes its place. And then it creates cancer, what you call a cancer. But it actually is what we put in there ourselves, and one of the things needed. If you break it up, now you have a bigger source for a healthy life. You can change this poison to one of the biggest benefits to mankind. Many of problems we have in the world of medicine is because the phosphor in a DNA, in a spinal helix cord, changes. And when it changes, it moves the rest of the chain, one of what we call protein amino acids in the C, into something else, or move it slightly to one side, then we call it genetic defect. If you continuously supply the body of the man with enough phosphor, that it cannot, especially in the GANs of phosphor, you never change the DNA, you never change any, you never get any diseases. Send this to Monsanto and explain what I just explained this section, tell them we found the solution for your problem. You have to have a full knowledge of the science of creation. You say they are trying to sort this thing out, and if you have a knowledge, with 1 second you can solve it, you see it.
For further information on the extraordinary products based on this plasma technology, click on the link to the storefront below that covers your area.